Amber Heard and Kate Moss, Fury Analysis. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Yesterday, I played you a short clip which showed Kate Moss testifying and Amber Heard's response to a couple of things that were said. I invited you to observe and provide me with your comments and observations, and you have done so. Thank you for doing that and for demonstrating the level of learning that you're acquiring from my work. I explained that I would analyse it for you. Let's have another look at the footage, and then I'll dive straight into the analysis.
No, Mr. Depp.
I had a relationship with him.
Did there come a time when you and Mr. Depp had a romantic relationship?
Yes.
For how long, Ms. Moss, were you and Mr. Depp a romantic couple?
From 1993 to 1994 to 1998.
Ms. Moss, did there come a time when you, while you and Mr. Depp were a couple, that the two of you took a vacation together to the Golden Eye Resort in Jamaica?
Kate Moss is asked, "How do you know Mr. Depp?" She explains, "I had a relationship with him." At this point in the proceedings, they are not about Amber Heard. They're about Kate Moss and Johnny Depp. They're about Depp's relationship with Moss, Moss's relationship with Depp. It's as if Amber Heard does not exist. She is not receiving any fuel at this juncture. We don't know what her pre-existing fuel levels are, although they should be fairly decent. She's surrounded by people who will have been interacting with her, her lawyer, members of her coterie, and so forth. However, no fuel is currently being provided. Like any machine that's functioning, over time, the fuel level drops and needs to be replenished. She is not receiving any replenishment, and her fuel level is slowly dropping. This doesn't present a problem for her. But this situation does, because not only is she not being fueled, she's being wounded. The reason being is that nobody's talking about her. Nobody's looking at her. Nobody's reacting to her. Nobody's doing anything in relation to her. This is about both Depp and Moss. And therefore, her narcissism needs to do something to bring attention back onto her. The fury, which is always lurking beneath the surface, read my book Fury to understand more about that, will now ignite as a necessity to compel her to do something to correct this situation. Remember, her narcissism is a self-defense mechanism. It's there to obtain control, fuel, character traits, and residual benefits, the prime aims. And in this situation, it needs to stop the wounding, because that's a threat to control, reassert that control, and quite possibly look for fuel to heal, in inverted commas, the damage caused by the wounding. Although her fuel level is naturally eroding, it's only doing so at a slow rate. That's fine. So if she was, for instance, just watching a television program on her own, she's not being given any fuel, and her fuel level is dropping, but slowly. Here, she's being wounded. And, like an oil tanker being holed beneath the waterline, her fuel level is dropping faster because of this wounding, the fuel spilling out. Therefore, her narcissism needs to do something to protect her. The footage cuts to Heard, who has gone back to her hair up and full makeup style. And then the question is asked if the relationship between Moss and Heard was a romantic relationship. Again, the wounding continues because it's not about Heard. And at this point, we see the first glimpse of the fury that is ignited. It's only visible when romantic is mentioned, because it's talking about the relationship that she wanted with Depp that no longer exists. Her narcissistic trait of envy is motivated. And accordingly, the eye fluttering that is seen is a demonstrative of the agitation that she's experiencing because her fury has ignited, but her facade management is fighting to keep the fury under control. If she were to stand up and yell, "You fucking lying bitch," as some types of narcissists might do, and those of you who have experience with lesser narcissists in the court system may well have seen these explosive outbursts before they vault the stand and assault somebody or run out of the courtroom. But because she operates a facade, that isn't going to happen, at least not yet. She has the requisite level of control to prevent that from occurring. Remember, she isn't thinking to herself, "I've got to keep myself under control here. I've got to keep myself under control here." Her narcissism is doing it for her. The necessity of facade management means it can't let the ignited fury appear in a heated fashion, at least. When Moss confirms that it was a romantic relationship, we see more fluttering. The fury wants to come out. It wants to help her. It wants to make her do something to turn eyes onto her so that she receives the fuel and this wounding is halted. But the facade management aspect of the narcissism is not letting that happening. Notice her breathing, the pronounced chest movements, which are demonstrative of the agitation that she's experiencing, caused by this fight between her ignited fury that wants to burst free and the facade management aspect of her narcissism that is trying to keep it in check. Kate Moss is then asked about how long the relationship lasts. And when she answers, then the fury is starting to get closer to the surface. We see that Heard shifts uneasily in her seat. There's a head roll, almost like an athlete when they're under pressure. Their head starts to roll because they're becoming exhausted. There's other head movements and she's shifting in her seat. This again demonstrates the fight that's going on as the fury is trying to make its presence known. The fury wants to pour forth. It wants to stop this repeated wounding that she's experiencing, as this particular witness talks about a romantic relationship with Johnny Depp. It doesn't matter that this relationship was years ago. That's irrelevant. What is happening now is it's all about Moss and Depp, and not about Heard, and therefore she's being wounded. She cannot assert control directly. The facade management is not going to let her stand up and say to Moss, "You skinny cocaine-abusing bitch." The facade management won't let that happen. Moss is secreted in some underground bunker. Or maybe she's in some kind of strange cell, but who knows? So it's not as if Heard can suddenly turn up and bitch slap her. So the direct assertion of control is not available to her. This testimony is threatening her control not because it's saying anything bad about her, but by the simple fact that she's not being mentioned at all. Her narcissism does not choose the indirect assertion of control. For instance, she could make a comment to her lawyer about Kate Moss, and for the lawyer to respond, which would give her an unconscious sense of control over Moss and do so indirectly. But the narcissism doesn't go there. Instead, it seeks to gain control by staying in a position of withdrawal and essentially dismissing Moss. Her narcissism will be causing her to think along the lines of, "Who's this tedious bin? What does she know about Johnny Depp? Gosh, this is boring. When are we going to get back to doing something that's far more interesting, i.e. me?" And therefore, it causes her to try and dismiss her. But the problem is, she's still looming large there on a screen in front of her. And therefore, the problem that continues for Amber Heard is that the wounding is persisting. So you have this almost back and forth. She's wounded, fuel level starts to plummet, she doesn't have control. The ignited fury is trying to get that control, but the facade management won't let it do so. Not a problem ultimately, because it won't let her do it directly. It chooses not to do so indirectly, but it will do so by staying in a position of withdrawal. If at this point Kate Moss disappeared, and then her lawyer turned to her and started speaking to her, she's no longer being wounded, and she's receiving fuel from her lawyer. But in moment 1, she gains control by staying in a position of withdrawal. But Moss doesn't go away. She's there. She's there in front of Heard. So the wounding happens again in the next instance. Accordingly, what then happens is her narcissism, the fury continues, and we see the eye fluttering, and it causes her to stay in a position of withdrawal. But Moss doesn't go away. She wounds again, and again, and again, until the increasing nature of the wounding is being dealt with by the narcissism, keeping her in a position of withdrawal, only for the wounding to come back. Stay in position of withdrawal to nullify the threat to control. The threat manifests again. And that's why she looks so uncomfortable. She can't withdraw totally from Moss by getting up and leaving the courtroom. She has to stay in a position of withdrawal by not having an interaction with her, but telling herself that this worthless bint on the screen doesn't look so great. I'm better looking than her, and gosh, this is boring, and she didn't really know Johnny in the way that I did, etc., etc. Her narcissism will be throwing that up repeatedly in her head to keep her in this position of withdrawal, to maintain this position of superiority in order to assert control. But then the control is threatened again because the wounding continues. And you have this vacillation of the back and forth of threat to control, control obtained, threat to control, control obtained, threat to control, control obtained. All the while, she's not getting any fuel. Her fuel levels are dropping. The ignited fury is using up the fuel, hence the increased appearance of discomfort. Of course, the clip doesn't last long enough to see where we get to next, but this is demonstrative of demonstrating wounding, the impact upon the narcissist, the clash between the ignited fury and facade management, the manifestation of discomfort, the eye fluttering, the agitation, the shifting in her seat. As that ignited fury wants to make its presence felt to help her gain control once again, but the facade management is not letting that happen. And she has to stay in a position of withdrawal, thinking dark thoughts, in effect, about Kate Moss. This short clip is an excellent example of ignited fury being kept in check, but how it does have its tells, so to speak, with regard to the narcissist. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.